Wasn't a contestant. He was one of the 3 judges. He was known for his enthusiasm at tasting time, like he'd make very enthusiastic noises and be very encouraging.
Do you have any sound bites of the George Calombaris food noises per chance?
Not on me. They were a bit like this. They'd be like, oh, that kind of
Excellent.
stuff.
And there's our social clip. Love it. Hello and welcome to the Big Con podcast, where we use the benefit of hindsight and a healthy dose of schadenfreude to look at where businesses took a misstep that had an impact on their profit, their brand, or something much more dire. I am one half of the Big Con podcast, Dale, big business nerd.
And I'm Emily, Harvard degree candidate.
So many businesses refuse to invest in strategy, and we're here to show you why that is so wrong. Emily.
Hello.
Which poor souls are we looking at today?
Poor soul, really.
Oh, just a singular soul.
Well, it did impact a lot of people, but really, we've got one leading protagonist today. This is one our Aussie listeners are going to be pretty familiar with. Our international listeners may be aware of this, or they may have no idea.
We're talking about party boy Corey, who had the big party in his house.
No, we're not talking about party boy Corey. I'm talking about Greek culinary MasterChef legend George Calombaris.
Georgie!
Dale, what do you know of his
himself.
Journey?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I've never been kept up in the MasterChef hoopla. I have eaten at George's restaurants, a few of them, and they love the food. Excellent. Man can make some saganaki.
I love MasterChef. My mum and I are huge fans. We actually went to Andy Allen's restaurant the other day, who was a MasterChef winner. And yeah, absolutely love it. But obviously this is not a success story. So we're going to dive into what happened to George and his restaurant empire and where it went, because it no longer exists.
It's completely gone. I tried to go to one of his souvlaki places the other day, and it was completely replaced with another souvlaki place.
Completely gone.
Yeah.
But as we so often do when we have a protagonist, let's start from the very beginning. A very good place to start.
Georgie boy origins.
So he is the son of Egyptian and Cypriot migrants to Australia. So the man is no stranger to hard work, and he was determined from a very young age to be a hugely famous chef. And when he was growing up, it was sort of before the days that television chefs really were household names, before you had, your Jamie Olivers.
Australia had Huey, and that's probably it.
Yeah.
Huey's Cooking Adventures.
Yeah, I think. And George would have been young when that came about, but just wasn't very popular. But he just knew he wanted to be the best chef growing around. Throughout his career, he hit the ground running. He was Apprentice of the Year in 1999. He was named one of the top 40 most influential chefs in the world in 2004. Also
Cool.
Young Chef of the Year in 2004. He then opens his very first restaurant, which is called The Press Club, which a lot of people will have heard of. And that was in 2006 to critical acclaim. And then he was named Chef of the Year, and Press Club was Best New Restaurant of the Year in 2008. Entrepreneur of the Year in 2011. And at one point, he represented Australia in the Bocuse d'Or, which is the international cook-off for professional chefs. So if you think it's like
Chef Olympics.
Yes, exactly. So Australia apparently never was close to winning, but
The meat pie, the humble meat pie, doesn't do too well on the global stage.
Exactly, but George apparently came the closest an Australian has ever come. So look, he's playing a big game, and the Press Club marked the first restaurant in what was to become an empire of restaurants. So we've got Ghazi. We had multiple locations for Hellenic Republic, and then we had Jimmy Grant's, which was fast
Jimmy
food.
Grant's. Excellent.
Yeah, it was a fast
chippies?
food. Yeah, it was basically a Greek, like souvlaki, fast food Greek restaurant, but it was supposed to be really high quality, and it was.
Yep.
Fun fact, Jimmy Grant's got its name because that was actually the name given to migrant dock workers in Melbourne in the 50s, regardless of their actual name. So Melbourne was a bit racist back then, especially towards to Greek and Italian migrants. So that was sort of like a nod to his heritage and the humble souvlaki.
Shame on them. They're the fool now. Jimmy Grant's is a cool name. I'd love to be called Jimmy Grant's.
Exactly. I feel like Jimmy Grant's has a fedora jauntily on the
100%.
side.
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
So George is just constantly on the rise, and then he lands MasterChef Australia. So if you don't know, MasterChef is a global chain of reality TV shows. It gets home cooks as contestants. So you can't have been trained as a chef to run through a series of challenges. And week after week, they get eliminated to crown the winner. But George wasn't a contestant. He was one of the 3 judges. Out of the 3, he was known for his enthusiasm at tasting time. Like, he'd make very enthusiastic noises and be very encouraging. And he also was known for helping chefs through disaster. So he'd give them a bit of a pep talk, like if their cake had fallen or their chicken hadn't quite cooked through, he would talk to them about strategies to, you just got to get something on the plate, what are you going to do, and help them. So this is what he was known for, mentoring.
Do you have any sound bites of the George Calombaris food noises, perchance?
I actually, not on me. They were a bit like this. They'd be like, oh, that kind of stuff.
And there's our social clip. Love it.
But like, this mentoring kind of side to him is very interesting to note because of where we end up. In George's business, he projected that he was this supportive, enthusiastic boss, and he had a
good for the industry as well. Like, he seemed like he was good for the industry.
Yes. And he had a strong interest in those that were working in his businesses, particularly his chefs. And he wanted to create a culture of hard work, but also success. And he would run little MasterChef-style challenges and encourage creativity in the kitchen within his businesses. And he was said in an interview that challenges like MasterChef are good for them because it's real world. He says the restaurant business is pressure. This is livelihoods. This is suppliers. This is creditors. So it is interesting. And at the same time, he was extremely vocal around how difficult it was to run a profit in a restaurant. He was particularly against penalty rates, as he said that it meant it was impossible to hire, and this is his phrase, young Johnny and make any money on a Sunday. So you hire those young kids because then you're going to have to pay them like $42 an hour. In a profile that was done on him in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2016, which was really good, George shares that his labour costs amount to 42% of his total costs. And then he says, I'm not crying poor. I just want the industry to be fruitful. So he's quite loud about the issue of paying staff and how impossible it is for restaurants and for quite a long time. Because then we get to the scandal. Because not only has George been saying it's too hard to pay staff, it turns out that his empire, which is actually called Made Establishment Group, so that's the name of the group that own all those restaurants.
Yep.
They actually have not been paying their staff. So he's been complaining about it, but also not doing it.
They're not paying, I'm assuming, not paying at the appropriate rate. Like, they weren't working for a volunteer basis.
No, yes. So they were being underpaid. In 2016, that's when we first start to see the complaints from the staff coming out to Fair Work. But George and co say, oh, no, sorry, yep, they're right, but we fixed it. So the former chief executive of Swiss Vitamins, Radek Saleh, I apologise if I haven't pronounced that properly, took a major stake in the company and was quite alarmed. Like, he started pulling on a string and then just the whole sweater started to unravel.
Oof.
And in 2019, the group admits to underpaying $7.83 million in wages to 515 current and former employees. Huge.
Yeah.
They're now up for a massive fine as part of an unprecedented deal with the Fair Work Ombudsman. So this discrepancy, like you said, it wasn't because they weren't paying people, but it was a failure to pay minimum award rates, penalty rates, casual loadings, overtime rates, split shift allowances, and annual leave loadings. So people basically aren't, like, probably working millions of hours but not getting overtime rates during those hours, so you're still working for pittance. And then months later, Feb 2020, Made Group establishment actually had to close their doors to every single one of their restaurants. So it wasn't just one, it was all of them just shut.
So I'm assuming did the wage scandal almost impact their profits and their ability to operate?
Yes. So I think it was a combination of the fact that they had this huge fine to pay and also the fact that people stopped supporting them. Like, people stopped walking through their doors. They tried to rebrand. So the Hellenic Hotel in Williamstown relaunched as Hotel Argentina. Public in Brunswick opened as the Crofted Dining Room. And the Press Club relaunched as Electra. But they still weren't able to get those people coming through because people wanted to boycott this place. And they handled it very poorly when they had to go under. One staff member said that they found out the restaurant, and apparently this wasn't a unique experience, but said a lot of them found out that restaurants were closing because George made a post on Instagram. So it went out to the public before internal. And they had some very vulnerable staff, like immigrants, who were very dependent on their job to stay in the country. So there was a lot of like stories
It's common in the hospitality industry.
Yeah, and just a lot of like stories coming out about people who lost everything because George went under. So then the group sort of had this secondary PR crisis because they had looked to handling things externally, not internally. And that's a really interesting concept, don't you think? I feel like, Dale, we've seen this before where it's all about handling the outside perception and not about what you're doing to support your staff internally.
And it's where we say hindsight is amazing because you can make some decisions in that crisis moment and go, I wish I'd gone left, not right. I wish I'd done this and not posted this. And all of a sudden we always say the contagion spreads. The contagion spread and you're the one helping it spread because you mishandled a crisis.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah. But why did this really undo the Made Establishment Group? Because we've seen over the course of this podcast that there have been a number of scandals, like PwC from last week, that rocked the boat a bit. How come he couldn't just apologise, pay people back, and we all move on? Why did people feel the need to boycott these restaurants? And I can think of two possible scenarios, two possible things. One, this, as Australians, really did directly hit our hip pocket nerve. The working felt that money leave our own pockets. We've all worked. Many successful people have go through and do their stint in hospitality.
Yeah, it's right.
And this is rife in this industry. I remember being paid $18 an hour when I was entitled to 22, but they said,
I was going to say 18's all right, Em.
Yeah, but I think because of my age. I think because of my age, I was entitled to 22, but they paid me 18, and then paid the rest cash in my pocket because of some sort of tax thing. Like it was rife. They didn't want to pay taxes, and it is hard to earn a buck in the hospitality industry. So we've all been treated like this from an employer. We've been underpaid, overworked. So
there's likely a vulnerability that you mentioned before around the type of person who's come for that job. Like they're washing dishes. They're not necessarily going to be starring on MasterChef within the next 6 months, but they're coming into that and they're just happy to have some money coming in. And as soon as I ask the question around like, I don't think I'm getting paid right, it's more easy to show them the door. And than to fix up your books because, not great.
Yeah, I even remember working for a restaurant once, and I said, "Can I have a day off to work on my final project for uni?" Because I was a uni student, and he said, "I have about 10 other people that could slot into your position. Would you like a job here or not?" We've all got those stories in hospitality. The second thing, and I think perhaps I'm speculating wildly here, but that's sort of what we do on this podcast. I think maybe part of the problem was also the celebrity face at the top of the pyramid because it's far easier to feel disgust for conduct when there's a face attached to that you can't remove from the brand. He is the brand. So your PwCs maybe get off because you're just like, oh, that's a big corporation, and you can't feel as much
faceless accountants and consultants,
and you just can't feel as much emotion and war towards those people. Whereas it's so easy to just blame George.
We're not going to support George.
Obviously, like heaps of people working on this project that's not just George, and I think he probably had very little to do with the operations.
It's hilarious about the Australian mentality around. We're not going to support George, and we're really angry about those poor people being impacted. understanding that their actions to boycott are more likely going to impact the most vulnerable in this situation.
Yeah.
The Australian psychology, it's an interesting one sometimes.
George, in the public eye, blamed extremely poor operational processes for the oversight.
Yep.
I guess insinuating that they didn't really know that they were skirting their employer responsibilities. But I just wonder, is there more to explore? Because this took down a huge restaurant empire basically overnight or within a couple of months. So let's have a break. And when we come back, as George would say, let's get into it, yeah?
We're back. George Calombaris and Made, a restaurant empire that collapsed.
I thought you were saying mate and mate.
And Mate. Made. M-A-D-E.
Made Establishment Group.
Made Establishment, which was the umbrella company.
What are some of your thoughts, Dale? Aside from them just ignoring laws?
Well, the laws is interesting. You can search wage theft or talk underpayment in Google in Australia, and every company, or a lot of companies, have put their hand up and said, oh, we found some discrepancies. We've accidentally been underpaying our staff millions of dollars over a certain amount of time. The RBA, Reserve Bank of Australia, they had to admit to it earlier this week. Don't see people boycotting them, although I'd love to. Bunnings, I think, was in trouble recently. BHP was in trouble over a 10-year period. And there's some commentary in that around how confusing the wage laws are and things like award rates and what to pay casuals and if you can pay this person and then the super changes, etc. And I think our systems and laws and legislation have changed quite a lot over the past 4 years. A lot of it to patch things up and to kind of stem the flow. And I believe that, and rightly so, I feel like in terms of wage theft and underpaying staff, the Calombaris was one of the first ones to be really made an example of. And I look at the fine, $200,000, not great. No one wants to pay $200,000. In the same lens, it shouldn't be the thing to cripple the entire company. So, yes, a little bit of defense. I think there's a bit of George's rhetoric around how hard it is to pay award rates and why that shouldn't be appropriate, and which is something that has been quite common in the hospitality industry. It's either cash on the hand, et cetera, and the government really wants to move away from that. A, from the point of protection, B, so people pay their taxes. Interesting lens we can take that. It might be good for some people to receive that cash in hand job because they might double dip and also receive settling, something that we do not approve of on this podcast, but of course, you do you. So a moment of defense for how difficult the wage laws are.
Yeah.
But I think his whole image and how much he spoke about how it was unfair didn't really help him. I think that's probably the main thing here.
Yeah.
George's image. We've said it before. He's virtue signaling about being supportive and helping, and then be shown to effectively be robbing the poor dish hand.
I think it's really hard because I don't necessarily think George is virtue signaling. I think that he genuinely is like that. And I think he genuinely wanted to support people in their successes.
He also had his views. He also had his views. He's like,
yes, and I think his version of success is not financial.
Yeah, it's pull your socks up and work hard.
Yes. So I think he potentially just genuinely thought this is what I've got to do to run this business, which sort of gets to one of the things that I was thinking of, and that is the point of staying in your sphere of genius.
Ooh, go on.
George was running a conglomerate. By all accounts, from all the things that I read, he was very involved. And obviously he was very aware of the profit margins and all of that sort of stuff. George's genius is making food. And making food in a way that people love, that brings you, it was never overly fancy, but it was just delicious. And that was...
Even Jimmy Grant's had a handmade, home-cooked vibe about it.
That was the genius that George did. We all sort of have to put on a million hats these days. Everyone's got to be entrepreneurial. Everyone's got to be...
You need 15 side hustles just to keep your life going.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that this is something that he could have avoided, but it's something that he could have thought about, which is okay, what I'm going to do is I know that I need some of the smartest people running this business because I'm going up like this and I'm going to be, I'm creating an empire. And I need someone to come in with the skills that I don't have, that I trust, so that I can stay in my sphere of genius.
It's like the rule of three, in which when you're building a company, your business will fundamentally change every multiple of three. And so when you're just working between two people, that's great. So Emily, right now, this podcast works pretty well. We would bring on another person. We'd have to change everything because all of a sudden we're having to not communicate between us, but also communicate between this third person. And then we go again and go 3 times that, which is 9. And that took me far too long
to
do that math. But that again changes. Your process is always already changing because you might not only be having all people doing the same thing in that business, but you're maybe bringing in more operational support. And the operational support is there and they're going to create their own processes. And again, times 3. And so there's this interesting concept around the rule of 3 and how you need to effectively reconsider your whole business every rule of 3. And I imagine the maid establishment has had such great growth in that period, not just from multiple restaurants, but multiple sort of whole franchise.
Yeah.
It appears
and then
that
there's,
the operational...
the PR stuff and him as a celebrity. And then there's the restaurants and running of the restaurants. It's like there's quite a lot of stuff going on there that we don't know whether that was being looked after properly. And like the whole thing is this whole business was built up around George. Which brings into a really interesting thing, which is building businesses around a face. So like, for example, if Kylie Jenner goes down, so does the lip gloss. But it swings and roundabouts because a restaurant chain was never going to get that big in the first place if you didn't have a celebrity chef attached to it. So it's, can you
make the money while you make the money and then strike
or you have to protect that reputation of that chef at all costs. Otherwise everything goes down.
If you look at similar examples, your Jamie Oliver's has done quite well and hasn't been not attached to a scandal. There's been certain things around his restaurants being closed down due to being poorly run, etc. But Jamie Oliver has done something quite well to protect that image and that brand around hardworking, lovable English chat. And I think George did, for the most part, that as well. And so there is models in which this does work.
Yes, 100%. But it's like you have to go in with your eyes open. That's what you're doing. And maybe the PR needed to come in all around George and be like, he didn't know, or whatever it was, to save the face of George Calombaris, which might have in turn, then people might have gone, oh, it was some bigwig executive making the... I don't know. You don't want to like find a scapegoat either because that's not very moral. But it is interesting to think about if you are going to be building something around one person, that's your asset. And you need to make sure that your asset's intact.
Let's play that out though.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the dream be, because I think there's a lot of influencer brands that we've seen so much. No, it used to be the Andy Warhol, everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. Now everyone's famous. You can open up your phone and live stream and easily get quite a few thousand views. So everyone can be famous in one drop of a hat. So fame has changed entirely. And I think we've seen that. We don't have movie stars anymore, per se. So I wonder if, isn't the dream to, you use your fame or your initial blip, which everyone is now easily attainable and almost democratized, to build the next thing, build the business and build something that's a bit more of an establishment. And I think that's like, I see semblance of that in terms of making Made. And so there could have been space in that time to almost segment. And I think they did. I feel like they tried in terms of the relaunching and rebranding. There was efforts to do the right thing, but because it was so much about the Calombaris of it all, it got sucked back into the whirlwind and the storm that was there. So I feel there is benefit in building a brand around a single, I'll say point of failure, but point of success in terms of celebrity or influencer, or whatever that might be. But the best option for that is to transcend that person and put the team behind it and make it an empire and establishment that is away from, let's say, a Chris Hemsworth or a Kylie Jenner. So what's next beyond that? So you start to no longer associate it with, oh, this is George's restaurant. It's like, oh, we're going to this place. I'm buying this product, not because of the celebrity attached to it, but because I like that product. I think for me, would be the ultimate goal. But that takes time. It takes investment. It takes doing the right thing across everything else to remove those point of failures.
And I mean, I think like just really simply, don't take advantage of unskilled workers. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're some of our most vulnerable people. They're working their butts off. They're like, minimum wage is hard to live on anyway. And if you're not going to do it because you care about those people, do it because you could have this huge scandal and everyone could rise up, because actually the way our thinking is going as a society, as a culture, is we're starting to become more and more aware of the discrepancy between unskilled workers and, you know, your CEOs. And the living wage is hard, and we're in a period of inflation, and we're in a time where even people who are on a good wage are struggling to, you know, buy groceries at times. So I think it's really important that if you're going to start and build an empire, you understand that it is your obligation and duty to look after the people that work for you, because they're the people that make your business a success. So if you're not going to worry about what they're doing in their private lives, at least think about how they contribute to your business and how your business doesn't run without them. So taking care of them is actually in your best interest.
I'll look to Danny Meyer, who runs Shake Shack in America and Gramercy Tavern and Union Square Cafe. And he has this lovely sentiment around, it's not about a family. He recognizes it's a business.
Yeah.
But in terms of when he brings them in, making sure they get the training, making sure that they have the right, firstly, they're the right fit for the company, but is supported to be able to give their best back to the customer. Because at the end of the day, hospitality is so much about customer service. And if you're treating your staff right, then they're going to treat your customer right, which is then in turn going to lead to a great experience, and they're going to come back. Seems obvious when you say it. So maybe I'll go start a restaurant after this and pay people correctly. What's the real lesson here, Em? Because for me, all I saw was that George ultimately ended up on The Masked Singer. And we don't want that for any of our listeners.
There actually is a bit of an update on George, and he's coming out the other side. But I'm actually going to save that for our Lessons Learned podcast, because there's quite a bit I think I want to dive into around that that we don't have time for in this ep. So stay tuned for a George update.
Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you, Emily. A little bit solemn, but very interesting. I'm glad I know what happened to Jimmy Grants. Thank you for listening to this episode, listeners. We hope you have avoided appearing on The Masked Singer in the future. If you would like to learn more for your business, head over to our website, thebigconsultingagency.com, and sign up to the mailing list to hear news about workshops, to stay up to date with new episodes. You can find me on Dale Bryce L on all platforms. Please don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app of choice, or if you prefer listening to our beautiful faces, jump onto YouTube and apparently TikTok. We're appealing to our youthful audience, and it's going great. We have some of our content up there, 5,000 or so views. Incredible.
Amazing.
TikTok is a scary, scary thing. And for those who remember season 1 and Jana, we're hot on your heels, love. All the best, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.